Hello and welcome back inside the Parc Fermé F1 podcast number 865. That's right, 65 after 800. This is Todd, you know.
No, Todd, not now!
And you know why I've asked you here.
You must convince the villagers that I'm harmless.
That's exactly what I need to do. Tonight, for your kind consideration, we're going to be talking about, well, what are we going to talk about? What could we talk about?
Vegas, baby, Vegas!
We're going to talk about Vegas. Now, I know what you're saying. It's already done and dusted, Todd. You know, people are mad. People are elated. Half of us don't even remember the race or what happened. No one can even really remember the highlights at this point. It's been so long ago. But for those of you that remember, there is a friend of our show who has his own podcast, Jeff, over at Jeff Does Vegas, Jeff Walker, over at Jeff Does Vegas. It's a great podcast. It's all about Vegas, and he had me as, for whatever reason, bless his heart, he had me on as a guest to talk about the Formula One race before that, and so we're going to have Jeff on, but before introducing Jeff and getting his thoughts on Vegas, I have to introduce co-host. You know what that means. That's exactly what it means. I got to go to the right coast of our nation, nestled in our nation's capital, where she plies her skills as a master statistician. You know her, you love her, the lovely, the redoubtable
Grace!
Grace, how you doing?
Doing all right, you know.
Good. Grace, I figure, it's going to take a guy like Jeff to keep you and I in line on this Vegas thing.
Well, I mean, it's week 1 of 14, so
Yeah, right.
we'll see
right.
how it goes.
The whole up season. Jeff, welcome to the
right.
show. It's great to have you
Absolutely
here.
welcome,
Thanks
man.
for joining us.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate the invite. This is I've been looking forward to this conversation for the last couple of weeks because it's been a few weeks since the race,
Yeah.
and it's been some time now since the season has come to an end, and I'm not getting my F1 fix the way I have been through the season. So this is an opportunity for me to get this out of my system. I don't have to share my thoughts with my coworkers who are tired of hearing about F1. So this is great.
I feel
That's
that.
great.
I used to always have to tell my friends, like, okay, I'm about to say some things. You're not going to know any of these things, but at the end, just go, oh my God, Grace, that's amazing. Okay, go, right? Because
Right.
I have to tell somebody. So
Yeah.
I get that.
So, Jeff, before we get too deep into the podcast, normally people turn it off after 10 minutes or so. Give all the listeners an idea of what your podcast is, where it can be found, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, so I do a podcast all about Las Vegas, as mentioned. Excuse me. It's a little bit different than the standard Vegas podcast. I don't just cover gambling and sports betting and things like that. I cover all of it. I do trip reports following my little vacations, but in the meantime, I also do interviews with entertainers. I talk to Vegas experts. I go really deep. Something I've really started enjoying doing over the time that I've been traveling to Vegas is getting deep into the history of Las Vegas. A lot of people just think about the mob when it comes to Vegas history, which is obviously a huge part of it, but there's a real deep interesting history in Las Vegas, and so that's been a lot of fun to cover as well. And then I do some weird stuff as well, where I sort of go, I like to call Vegas adjacent, where it's not really a Vegas topic, but I figure out a way to sort of loop it into Las Vegas. So it's fun. I'm coming up on 5 years of doing this podcast now, and it's been a really interesting journey. I've got some really great relationships out of it and made some really cool friends and met some cool people. So it's been fun.
Cool. And is it www.jeffdoesvegas.com?
It is jeffdoesvegas.com, and then of course on everywhere that you'd listen to a podcast is where you can find the podcast as well. So
I was able to find it, so I'm
where it
sure
is.
people
Cool.
can find it.
Excellent. Well,
I can
I
find it,
thought it would
anybody
be
can find
fun to get back together, the two of us, since we talked about Vegas, and I offered up some Delphic Oracle thoughts on it before before the race, and then the race happened, and I wasn't really that far off. I wasn't anticipating water valve covers, but beyond that, I think I was pretty close. I thought it'd be fun to go in and talk about, now that the dust has settled, all three of us know this, and Grace and I have talked about this on previous shows, that heading into Vegas, there was so much angst and ire and teeth gnashing and criticism about going into it, and some of that was all being born from the invasive construction that was taking place on the strip and the grandstands and the palm trees and everything, and so you had a lot of people upset. You had a lot of people hand wringing over the fact that they weren't sure what the impact of their jobs would be. Legit, concerns. I get all that stuff, but there was a host of negativity that Formula One is a little less familiar with when it comes to popping up a street course, like in Saudi Arabia, Baku, Monaco, etc., Singapore, etc. So this was kind of different, right? And so you had that host, and then we had the issues during the race, and then our free practice, and then we've got the post-race fallout. So I thought it would be fun to talk about what you're hearing, what you're seeing from on the ground, and from those you've talked to and things you've read about the impact. And I think we'll start sort of at the top because, the whole thing was there because of money, and so I thought we'd talk about the overall economic impact. It was interesting. In what little time I had, Jeff, I was going through and reading some news articles post-race from just sort of some of the business people. The CEO of MGM Resorts said that, quote, "It was the highest grossing weekend for us in hotel revenue in the company's history. The second highest was CES in 2019. So when you think about other events that have happened in Las Vegas over the years and the scale of our company, that's quite something to have a record weekend on what would otherwise be the slowest weekend of the year," end quote. It was estimated to be about a $1.2 billion impact on the local economy. But, I got to thinking about these articles that I read, and I was thinking about what metric exactly is hotel performance and revenue the single indicator as to an event being good or not to the Las Vegas economy, just hotels, because I've seen many articles talking about the hotels' increased revenue. There's been some local small businesses that said they experienced the exact opposite. There was a Shell station owner at the corner of the strip that said the temporary bridges and foot traffic reroutes during construction has lost him millions in customers due to that construction. The Absinthe Show reckons they've lost $500,000 in revenue, while other shows were just canceled due to lack of attendees because of the redirection of the traffic and foot traffic, etc. But is that a key indicator? And then the local Shell station owner at the corner of the strip said he used to do 3,000 to 5,000 gallons per day, but that fell, and now he only occasionally hits 1,000 gallons in a day, and that only happens a couple times a month. And his in-store sales have fallen by 80%. So again, what's the appropriate indicator of a positive financial impact beyond MGM's hotels? Many suggest that Las Vegas had its best November in history, and perhaps, Jeff, I'm thinking out loud here, but perhaps the real indicator is the $100 million in tax revenue that the city gained as the real metric by which everything else is measured. But what's your opinion on that?
Well, I think it's very interesting, actually, the economic impact discussion and that argument. A couple of months shortly before the race itself, I actually did an interview with a sports economist to talk about the economic impact of professional sports in various cities. And we talked about these numbers that get thrown out anytime there's a major event coming into a city, whether it's a Formula One race or Super Bowl or the Olympic Games or World Cup or anything like that. And they always throw out these giant numbers like $1.5 billion, or, they're talking Super Bowl, they're saying $500 million kind of thing. And he said a lot of times with some of those events, you can take the decimal point and move it a spot to the left. So when they're saying 500 million in economic impact, it's probably actually closer to 50 million, because a lot of that money may have been spent in the city anyways. But that being said, November is always traditionally a slow month in Las Vegas. That time sort of immediately before and surrounding American Thanksgiving, and I say American Thanksgiving because as a Canadian, we do our Thanksgiving in October. So we get first Thanksgiving, I like to say. That time period around that time tends to be a slower time in Las Vegas. I always liked going to Vegas at around that time because it was slower. There were less people, the room rates were better, it was easier to get into places, things like that. This really is going to do a lot in bringing people into Las Vegas. And for all the people that were saying, oh, I'm avoiding Las Vegas because of Formula One and Formula One construction, October, the airport just posted record passenger numbers for October. So clearly people are not avoiding Las Vegas because of Formula One in the months leading up, which so many people said they were going to do. As far as the shows canceling and things like that, I love Absinthe. I love the Spiegel World people. Was it a $500,000 in revenue? That number seems really high to me, maybe, but I feel like that's a big number. A lot of the shows did... there were shows that did shut down over the course of Formula One. There were several, I think, of the Cirque du Soleil shows that canceled performances. They did it for a few different reasons. One, they didn't want to have their performers and their actors getting caught up in all the traffic and having to get in and out of the hotels during road closures and things like that. And they also knew that the people that were coming to Las Vegas for Formula One are not going to go see Cirque du Soleil. They're going for Formula One. That's why they're there. This happens. I asked a couple of friends of mine because I seem to recall that during other big events, Consumer Electronics Show is a great example because they get, again, 150,000 attendees or something like that for CES every year. It's the biggest conference of the year. And in years past, there were shows that would go dark during CES. Because, again, same thing. The people that are coming in for CES are not coming to go to see the Cirque du Soleil at the Bellagio. They're not going to go see Absinthe. They're not going to go see those shows. They're there for CES. CES hosts massive parties, same as Formula One did, for the people that are there for that event. So, I mean, I feel like the economic side of it balances out. I do feel for the smaller businesses in and around the track, like the guy that owns the Shell station. And I think if I'm picturing where it is in my head, I know exactly where that Shell station is. It's right on Koval and Flamingo, which was where one of those the overpasses were.
Yep.
I can totally see that because from what I saw of that area during that construction and during those overpasses being in place, that was a nightmare to get around through there. That being said, articles that came out following the race where Clark County and Las Vegas said, hey, you know what? Those actually worked really well to move some traffic around. Maybe we'll look at doing those permanently in that area. So you never know. That's kind of where that goes. The tax revenue thing, yeah, there's going to be a lot of money that comes in from tax revenue, obviously. MGM, their CEO, coming out and saying, yes, this was our best weekend in the company's history. I can totally see that because, of course, people that come in for Formula One, there's a lot of money there. And the properties that performed well, my understanding was the properties that performed well in Las Vegas were the properties that you would expect to perform well for a Formula One race. The Bellagio, the Cosmopolitan, the high-end properties, the Venetian, Caesar's Palace, places like that did well. Excalibur, maybe not so much.
Yeah. Gosh, that would have bummed Grace out down at the Luxor.
Yeah. It's definitely my end of the strip for sure.
But yeah, I mean, I feel like it's going to be a big weekend. We won't really know for sure until it's usually the end of the following month when the LVCVA, the Convention and Visitors Authority, releases their numbers as far as occupancy and gambling and revenue and things like that. So it'll be probably the end of December before we really know what the full impact was. But I mean, from what I understood, MGM was saying that they're Their properties were full. Again, the high-end properties, Videra, Aria, Bellagio, etc., they were full. There was lots of reports of dealers in the casinos in the high limits room making big tips, big money coming in there. There apparently was one whale that dropped $100,000 in tips in one of the poker rooms. I mean, like...
Who let Flavio in there, Grace?
You know, they won't let him at the race, but, you know, he'll be adjacent.
But yeah, I mean, I feel like it's short-term pain for long-term gain. Cannot deny the traffic nightmares and the construction. I was there in May of 2023 here, as they were sort of in full swing of tearing up the Vegas Strip. And there's no question it was an absolute, I will say, poop show. Because I don't want to get you guys the explicit tag. I don't want to be the one that does it. It was an absolute, it was a dumpster fire on the Vegas Strip. And it was like that for months. But I think that people have yet to figure out that it's not going to be like this every single year. They're not going to have to entirely rebuild the roadway every single year. That's what took all the time this time around, was all the fact they had to dig 3 feet down to build it back up and resurface it and all this stuff. It's not going to be like that every year. And I think people still have not figured that out yet.
Yeah. There's definitely, I was thinking, Grace, in the sense that you're always going to have that first sort of, you know, effort to put together Singapore, to put together Baku, to put together a street course like that. And there's always going to be disruption. It takes time to get everything going. Once it's up and going, I would say now Singapore hums like a clock, you know, and does pretty well. Difference on F1, because I think some of the criticism, and I don't know if you read any of those or not either, Grace, but some of those criticisms were like, well, the difference between, okay, yeah, it is a huge economic impact about F1, but, you know, when football comes to town, or a basketball championship, we don't have to tear all the streets up and everything to do it. The stadiums are there, and it doesn't require the disruption to the local life as much as Formula One does. So we don't have to build a stadium every time it comes, you know. But yeah, I find it's a good argument, but to Jeff's point, once you've done it, you don't have to do it every year.
I also think both are true. I mean, it's even like what you were saying, like the guy that owns the Shell station can be mad, and MGM can be like, "Woo, this was amazing." Both of those things are true, right? So, I was thinking of like, living in the DC area, roads get closed all the time for stuff. And when I don't work downtown anymore, but when I did work downtown, yeah, it's really annoying. And sometimes you have to be like, "Oh, right, they're protesting this thing I agree with," or like, they're here for peace. But you as a person who lives here, who's just trying to get from point A to point B, and it happens to be across the mall, you're like, I hate all these people that are here for peace, right? Like, so I definitely get that sort of, even though it's not on the scale of trying to shut down the Strip, but that idea of like, when you're a person who lives and works that close to, the mall area in DC, it's like, it's annoying. Or, you're just walking along in a motorcade shows, the presidential motorcade, they make everybody, if you're ever in DC during tourist season, this happens to you, they just stand on the corners, the Secret Service stand on the corners, and you just have to stand there for however long it takes in the pouring rain, if that's what happens. And a lot of the tourists are like, what's going on? And you're like, it's the motorcade, just hang out, you can't go anywhere. If you move, don't move, right? So, I can see that sort of like, if I was a person who lived and worked in the Strip, it's that same level of annoyance. The first time the motorcade comes through, you're like, wow, this is cool. And then the next time it comes through, you're like, I'm late. So
yeah.
I think both of these things can be true. And of course it is true. For the football game, it doesn't bother you if you're in the Strip necessarily. You don't have this whole building up of things. But I also do think it's true, even, going to the Indy race in Baltimore, the difference between year 1 and year 3 was like night and day, because you do figure things out, and people kind of get into the flow of it, and they're like, oh, we shouldn't have put that Armco there, we should have put it over here, okay, note for next year, right? So I think that's part of it too, is that all of these things are true, and you're going to have to live with this Vegas for, 10 years. So let's figure out where we can kind of try to find a happy medium between all these things, because all of them are true. You're going to be mad as a local, and you may be happy as a local.
Talking
the way
about
it goes.
Talking about that, Jeff. So you got the major corporations, the hotels, the hoteliers, banner November for them. You've got some local business very unhappy with the impact that they had on their business. I have to think, though, the service industry in a whole seems to me like they would have been pretty happy. You got a lot of catering to the F1 events, not just F1 teams, but F1 events and fans. You've got performers. What was the guy in the dragon suit? Was it Piff the Magic Dragon or something?
Oh yeah, Piff the I love Piff.
Yeah,
he cracks me up. I saw the video of him with Carlos. Was it
Carlos and Charles? Yeah.
And
so
I was laughing my ass off.
Yeah.
At that one.
So you got these local performers, getting gigs for corporate events, hospitality events. Is there a sense of how the service industry viewed it?
I have a friend who is, most of my friends down in Vegas, I'm very lucky. They're all of them are in the entertainment industry, for probably 99% of them. And one of them just in the last couple of years launched her own company as she was a singer. She's performed on the Strip, and she just launched a company focused on corporate gigs and corporate events. And so she's got a band and she does performances and all this stuff. And so she told me about a month ago that she booked a weekend's worth of private events for Formula One. And she was, when I said, oh, what kind of events are they? She says, I can't tell you. That's the kind of events they were. And they were super whammy VIP events, $15,000 per person type events. What she made in a weekend basically would be what she would normally make in 3 or 4 months.
Wow.
So there are those people. For all the complaining that a lot of the locals were doing, the people that were working that do those corporate gigs and those corporate events, and I can't even imagine the service industry. Now, that being said, the service industry people that would have done well, I think, would have been the high roller dealers, those guys that are in the win high limit table rooms, getting the $100,000 tips, the high end restaurants, places like that. I don't know what the Formula One crowd is like for tipping, so I don't know, but I would imagine that they probably throw a lot of cash around at those events. And I would imagine that a lot of the people working at those events in those restaurants and bars and in the hotels probably did really, really well. The biggest complaint that I heard from any of them that I read was the amount of time that it would take them to actually get to work because of road closures and construction. Now, that being said, another friend of mine who performs at the Bellagio at the Mayfair Supper Club was telling me that all of the construction over the course of the last however many months that she was going to work for that to that venue added maybe a half an hour to her commute. That was it. Like, it wasn't as bad as was being made out by all these people that were saying, it's taking me 3 extra hours to get to work. It's not. You're probably exaggerating. It's just how it is. People like to exaggerate, right? So that's probably what's happening.
Jeff, you're sucking all the fun out of this experience for people. It's the fish, right? Like, it's no different than that, right? The fish I caught was this, it was this, it was this. Every time I just added 10 minutes to my commute, every time somebody asked me.
It took me 7 years to get to work yesterday.
That's
how long it took me to work.
Both ways, right?
Exactly.
Snowshoes in the snow, right?
Well, what do you think, Jeff? There was so much. I remember one in particular. I'm not going to name him. Content creator, younger person. They just started watching Formula One, Drive to Survive. They've got this, now F1 channel. They're all the rage, and everybody loves them, and that's great. And I'm happy they're successful, but they were very negative about the whole thing. And I'm thinking, have you been to a Formula One race? If you haven't seen other street courses ramp up, first year jitters, first year errors, they've reprofiled Singapore several times, right? So if you haven't seen that, why are we being so negative? Why were all these content creators just so negative about this going into the race, and we haven't even seen it yet? Was it just born on a lot of the local press complaining?
I think it's a case of people they complain for clout. There's no other way to put it. That's the only way I can put it.
It's clicks.
And it's all about the clicks. And I mean, there are, I'm not going to name any of the content creators that I unfollowed in the weeks, the days leading up to the event, because I couldn't deal with it anymore. I just could not deal with these clowns that were complaining about everything. And one of my favorites, there was a dude that put out a video. It was titled F1's Impact on Vegas, and he was out front of the Venetian where they had they drained the
lagoon,
canal out front of the Venetian
Yeah.
to build a big grandstand for their VIPs. And I called him out on it, and I said, this is not F1's impact on Vegas. This is the Venetian's impact on the Venetian. This is the Venetian looking at it and going, if we drain this canal that nobody rides in November because it's too freaking cold to be outside riding in a boat on the Vegas Strip, we can put up a 30-foot high or 20-foot high grandstand platform, sell passes for $5,000 a person, fill it, and make money.
Right.
And he said, oh, well, it is F1's impact because blah, blah, blah. And I just went, you know what? Bullshit.
Yeah.
Because you're just, the way you are posting it and the way you are framing it and the way you're tagging it, you're doing it strictly for the clout and the clicks. I would rather have no clout and no clicks and put out something relatively balanced than just be feeding out this constant stream of crap, which is what a lot of these guys were. They would get onto something, and that was what they launched on. And the next thing you know, there's 25 videos about the plastic film on the windows and the fencing and their security and the da-da-da-da. And you're just like, shut up. Like, you know, a month from now, when the numbers come out and they said there's 300,000 people here and it brought $1 billion into the city, y'all are going to be sitting there going, this is the greatest event in the history of ever. And that's what's going to happen. I'm sorry, Grace, you really look like you wanted to say something.
It's the story of my life. I just sit here and raise my hand, right?
She does it for the clout.
That's it. It's the only reason. I've been doing this show for, 76 years just for the clout. See where it's at, right? What'd you say? 865 shows later. No, I was going to say, I think there's a difference between Stefano Domenicali knocked on your door and said, yo, this lagoon's got to go, and you saying, hey, I'm opportunistic, right? Like, I get this, right? We'll do this thing and we'll build this in. So, yeah, F1 is the reason, but there's a difference between, right? Like, you have to make this change and, I'm going to make this change, right? So I agree with that now, but I also agree that that's not a very good story. You're not going to make Todd's No Shit headlines by just saying, well, here's this really balanced observation I've made about Vegas, right? So I think sometimes, right, that's the downside of social media. The downside of everybody can be a content creator is that the way you make yourself stand out is by being I caught the biggest fish, right? Like the most outrageous thing you can come up with then becomes, and it's just like, okay, it's going to be inconvenient. I don't think, again, Baltimore, it was inconvenient. There's no way around it, but I think that it was also, I also think, while I'm talking, I've never been to an F1 race that there isn't some amount of like, waiting in your car to get to the track, or queuing in a line to get to your grandstand seat, like some part of that. And that's true at football games, that's true at basketball. There's always some amount of like waiting to do things, and the inconvenience, it's never just like I was helicoptered right into pit lane, and there's my seat, and here it is, right? There's always some level of like, and I've never even been to like Spa or some of the tracks like Monza that are like, or Silverstone, right? That are traditionally tracks that people are like, oh, the traffic. But, you know, even Montreal where you use Metro to get there, you're still queuing. You're still waiting some amount of time to get from your part of the track onto Metro. So, I don't know. Some part of this is just life. That's just part of it. Stop kvetching. This is what we do.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been to NHL games, to hockey games, Calgary Flames games here in where I am, and it's taken me 45 minutes to get out of the parking lot. Sure. And that's 42 times a year if people have season tickets and they go to every game.
Yeah.
And I mean, to be fair, they do complain about it every time. Look at all this stupid traffic. But still, and I mean, you mentioned Montreal. I have a friend of mine that went to her first F1 race a couple of summers ago, and she went to Montreal. And afterwards, she said the same thing. She's like, the only complaint I had was getting in and getting out. And getting in even not so bad because people are getting in at different times and sort of showing up. But when it's all done and everybody's leaving at once, it's like it's one way off the island and everybody's going at once. And now you've got 100,000 people all trying to go at once. So that does make it a little bit difficult.
Our secret is you go the other, there's one, I'd have to look at the map. I don't have it memorized, but there's one stop in the other direction. Go that way, come back around. Then you're not queuing with all those crazy people that are waiting there. And you're like, I have a seat, which is funny because we do that in DC all the time. Sometimes one stop in the wrong direction is faster than going the way you're going. So just go the one stop the other way. But yeah, there's only one way off. You just hang out. Grab a beer. We're going to be here for 20 minutes. Just wait. It's fine. You know, what are we? Right. The race is over. Alonso won. Let's just have a beer and wait it out.
Right.
The social media side of it that kills me on it too is, and as I say, I think people are more apt to click on the negative than on the positive too, right? And I mean, I've done this. I tried it as a mild experiment with one of my videos. I did a room tour video and I tagged it with, you won't believe what happened next. Nothing happened next, but I tagged it and it was one of my most viewed videos. I did that. And one guy commented on the video and he's like, I can tell you what won't be happening next. Me watching any more of your videos because this was dumb. And I'm like, well, you know what? I give you credit for a creative answer because rather than just saying, Jeff, you suck, they were like, I'm never watching your videos again. That's what won't be happening next. I'm like, kudos to you.
That's right.
I was going to do the title of this podcast, Grace destroys Christian Horner using this one weird trick. But, you know, I thought that might be good.
No, I don't like where that's going.
Yeah.
I don't want to be a part of that headline.
One weird trick, Grace.
I don't.
Nope.
I'm good, thanks.
No, thanks.
I don't need that.
No. So
I don't need that search. Like some future employers, like, wow, Grace, what is this? I don't need that.
What did you do? So, you know, the funny thing is,
man, I don't need that.
Is, you know, we try to approach this a balance, and Paul and I do on the race reviews as well. And it's funny because I think we've achieved that because if you go look at our ratings on the podcast, there's one-star rating that says you guys are racist and anti-Lewis Hamilton, blah, blah, blah. And then right next to it's another one-star rating that says you guys are nothing but Lewis Hamilton sycophants and kissing his butt or whatever. It's like, so two different people can listen to us and have a completely different opinion about it. So, you know, at least we're equal opportunity. Let's talk about the let's talk about the refund that wasn't, shall we? When you had the water cover valve, when that ended free practice 1, there was a 5-hour delay, as you guys will remember, why crews removed 30 similar covers and filled all the holes with asphalt. And as soon as that was announced, I was thinking, wait a minute. They just filled the holes up with asphalt? How are they going to get all that asphalt out of there and find the valve again? I mean, it's not like water's not an issue in Vegas or anything, but turn it on. We're dying, you know.
That's tomorrow Todd's problem.
Yeah, that's tomorrow's problem.
Monday Todd will figure that out.
I'm sure the F1 CEO is thinking, well, that's Vegas's problem. Clark County's got to figure that out.
That's that's what I would like to call a Clark County make work project. That's
Right.
a union boss somewhere going, hey, how can we guarantee some jobs?
Yeah.
Pour asphalt down there. That'll
Perfect.
somebody's got to jackhammer that out later. Problem solved.
Yeah,
win.
perfect. There were 35,000 people who bought tickets for Thursday's event, but those who bought weekend passes were not offered the I guess deal that Formula One made, which was a $200 merchandise credit. They offered that. And there was 35,000 people. This prompted a lawsuit within 24 hours of this actually happening, and that's how quick that was. I mean, not that America's litigious or anything, Jeff. I wouldn't want to give you that impression. I know you Canadians, may think we are, gosh. But that's, as Grace said or in the preamble, they got the whole American experience, right, Grace?
Welcome.
Yeah, you got it all.
That was peak America.
It
right
was.
there.
That's right.
And I say that with all the love in the world for you guys as a Canadian, but that was peak
Absolutely.
America.
Yeah, it
right
was.
there is what that was.
It totally
Full
was.
experience.
I tried to do a quick search today to see if there's any updates in the lawsuit. I didn't see anything yet. But the one thing I want to talk about is the room rates, which I thought were interesting. You and I talked about it briefly. We talked about it I was a guest twice on your show, and we talked about it, I think, both times on the room rates. Rumor has it that prices dropped as the event got closer. A lot of people read that they were overstating the interest in the race, or there were last-minute opportunists trying to fill every room and broom closet they could with a paying customer. What was your read on that?
So that is pretty much standard operating procedure for events in Las Vegas. I've experienced it myself. I've seen it myself. I've taken advantage of it myself, where they jack the room rates up way in advance. They take advantage of the people that are the early bookers, the people that want to make sure they're getting what they want, and they're going to get a room and they're going to be there. And as the event gets closer, and it doesn't matter if it's Formula One or a music festival or a big conference or a fight weekend or a football game, it doesn't matter. As it gets closer to the event, the room rates creep down. And that's just what happens. And everybody, and bring it around to these influencers again, the social media mavens that were out there posting the BS, they were framing it like this was the biggest disaster in the world. There's not going to be anybody there. Occupancy is low. Look at how low they're dropping the hotel room rates. And they did drop the rates quite significantly. But I mean, this is a case of the hotels have some rooms left. They'd rather fill them with something for cheap than keep the prices high and have them stay empty. So why not drop the rates, I should say, cut the rates significantly, charge a couple $100 for a room that 6 months ago was $1,000 a night, and just fill it up. For poops and giggles, I started tracking the Super Bowl weekend room rates because that's coming up here in February.
Right.
So I've started tracking. A couple of weeks ago, actually, I went through and I'm a big spreadsheet guy. So I broke out my Microsoft Excel and I made little columns and the whole deal. And I started tracking, just going on, not logging into my loyalty accounts or anything. So these are just public rates that you would see if you just went to the Caesars site or the MGM site or whatever, and just the lowest available priced room at each property. They have dropped in the last 2 weeks 15%.
Wow.
So I don't see any influencers out there calling Super Bowl a disaster yet. The average overall room rate has dropped. There are some properties that are still high. There are some properties that have dropped less than others. There are some that have gone up over the last couple of weeks. But this is my plan. My project is to track these to see how they do as it gets closer to the Super Bowl weekend, so that we can declare Super Bowl a disaster with a bunch of clearly empty hotel rooms because they're trying to fill them with low rates.
Right.
Like, that's the logic that was coming out and the way it was being framed. And again, you try to have a rational discussion with any of these people, and you're screaming into the void.
Yeah.
It's yelling at a brick wall with them. They don't, because that's not their narrative. It doesn't fit their narrative, right? So yeah, that's standard operating procedure for Vegas.
Yeah.
Same thing with the ticket prices that dropped significantly. Everybody was saying that wasn't a case. That was a case of the market correcting itself with the secondary market, because those ticket prices that everybody said were dropping before the event, those were the guys that went and bought the $500 Sphere Zone general admission tickets, jacked them up to whatever, $5,000, and then were stuck with them. And they were then fire sailing them for, or quote unquote, fire sailing them for face value. So it looked like it was a big drop in ticket prices. It wasn't.
Yeah.
And at that point, Formula One doesn't care because they've already got their money. It's the secondary sales guys that are getting screwed.
Right.
I also enjoyed the jokes about how much $200 in F1 merch actually buys you, right?
Actually, I was thinking that too. I'm like, oh, a coffee mug.
Oh, you get a key fob. Congratulations. Like, to me, it was just like, okay, first of all, if I was expecting money and you gave me merch credit, I'd be mad. Then you only gave me $200 in Formula One merch. What is that? Like, what does that buy somebody? Nothing.
I got a Lando key fob. Yay.
Yeah, right. Half a T-shirt. Yay.
Yeah.
Great.
I will admit that I know, like, I read the term, because the first thing I did when they said that, I jumped on the Vegas F1 site and I looked at the ticket terms and conditions, because I'm a nerd like that. And one of the terms and conditions are very clearly spelled out on all those tickets, and I'm sure they do it for every event, that there's no guarantee on the length of the event or the completion of the event or anything like that. That being said, if I was a guy that wanted to take my family out to an event and be a part of the weekend and just go to the FP1 practice, the FP1, FP2 Thursday night session, and because that's, was all I could afford to do, because that was still expensive. And it was canceled after 9 minutes, and then I got sent home after a 5-hour delay for the second one, I'd be choked.
Yep.
I would definitely want more than $200 in merch credit.
Yep.
Yeah, and I wonder how much. I'm sorry. How much conversation?
I was just. Are we gonna do this, Grace?
No, you go.
Okay.
You go.
We're gonna do this. Yep. Okay. So. No, and then I'll let you talk. I was just going to say, great. You and I talked about this a couple of weeks ago when this happened, and Paul and I did too. But I tried to put myself in F1 shoes with the caveat and the disclaimers per the legal ease on the back of the ticket, and I get it and I understand, and they're within their right. And I kept trying to have deference for that, but at the end of the day, like you, Jeff, if I only had Thursday night off, and I thought I'd take the kids down and. Just see, free practice is great because that's 2 hours of running, it's not just an hour of qualifying. So we went down on Thursday and that happened. No matter how much deference I have, I'd want my money back, and that's just, and I kind of felt like F1 made it right on the track. They need to make it right with those fans. And, but who knows if they will. Go ahead, Grace.
I was just going to say, sometimes the hardest thing, too, is that you're sitting there those 5 hours and you don't know what's going on. Now, granted, in the last 10 years, right, that's much easier, right? It used to be when you sat in the stands, you didn't have phones. Oh, my God, I remember those days, right? Like, now you have Twitter. Now you have the ability to call somebody but I've also been at races where I've called family members that are watching the race at home because the broadcast at home is telling them what's going on, but me in the stands has no idea what's going on.
Yeah.
So I think that sometimes some part of that 5-hour annoyance is, do I keep sitting here? It's like waiting for an elevator or a train or something. You always feel like the second I step off the train platform, the train's going to show up, right? Like, so how long do I sit here before something shows up, before somebody says to me, hey, this isn't going to happen, right?
Yeah.
I think as a fan, you understand all those things. It doesn't make you not mad. It doesn't make you not want your money back. But I can't imagine just sitting there for 5 hours and not necessarily knowing. Like, I guess it's like waiting for an airplane when it's delayed, right? That's the worst. You're like, okay, I can go to the bathroom, right? But I don't know. Maybe they're going to call my plane, right? Like, so it's always this, like, if you just knew, okay, come back in 3 hours and your plane will be here. Oh, all right, I'll go walk around. I'll go grab a food. I'll go, see the site, whatever. But you don't. They just tell you, just keep watching the gate for your changes. And I feel like that's how it feels when you're sitting in the grandstands. A lot of times you just don't know what's going on. And then I can't imagine sitting there all that time and then somebody says, oh, yeah, by the way, it's not happening. Right.
Well, not even so much it's not happening, but it's happening and you can't watch it.
Yeah, that's even worse.
Because
That's
that was the real sticker on this, was that, I mean, they kicked everyone out. And that, to me, that was everything up to that point in my mind was completely forgivable. Because it was a safety issue. They needed to make sure it was good. I would have taken a 5-hour delay for a safety issue. I have no problem with that. But to then turn around after I've sat there until 2:00 in the morning, to then turn around and say, sorry, you have to leave because we don't have the staff to handle this properly, to be able to make sure that we have drivers taking our VIPs to back. That was the one that got me when they said, we want to make sure that the drivers who are driving the limo transportation buses back to the win with the people that paid $25,000 to be here, we want to make sure they're safe. What? It's like, you can't tell me that there wasn't somebody involved somewhere that didn't think about the fact, like, worst case scenario, this.
They had to run
What's
that
the
out.
worst that can happen?
Yeah.
I don't understand how they wouldn't have.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I don't get that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I get it would be a totally different story to sit there for 5 hours and then have the whole thing be canceled. But to sit there for 5 hours, then be told to leave, and then as you're making your way back to your hotel, you're hearing them go by, and you're thinking, what is happening?
I'm missing it. Yeah. And then all of a sudden you're ripping down the black film, in front of the fence so you can see it. That's funny. Oh, Grace, you reminded me of the old days before we had the interwebs and we could sit and figure out what's going on. Remember, you had to go in and rent Race Fan Radio headsets, and they were like huge and they were twisted and they wouldn't stay in place. And Shrek wore them like the race before you got them, and they're massive and they have a little box, and you got it cranked to volume 10 and you can't hear crap because the cars drive by at 125 decibel, and it's like it's the old days. Yeah.
And the other thing too is that nobody else rented them near you, so you now you're like the comms guy, right? And
what
like
are they doing?
some Vietnam movie, right? Like everybody's like, oh, she has them. What's going on? I don't know. Stop talking to me, right? No,
Right.
I think there is something to, at least now you have the ability, and batteries last a long time, right? Because then that was a problem too. Is like you'd have a phone, but then it was a scarce resource because who knew when you were going to see a plug again in 10 hours.
My
right?
StarTAC is out of battery. Why isn't my Trio working? I'm like...
So I mean, I agree with you, Jeff. That you're right. That is absolutely the worst part. I just think that you're often just like a man on an island out there, and you're just like hoping that the guy next to you or the woman next to you has some information that they got over cups and some string.
That's true.
So you know what's going on.
So let's jump in and talk about what went right, Jeff. I had a few things.
Yeah, we've spent the last 48 minutes talking about all the things that went wrong.
We're doing it for the clout, baby. What can you expect?
For the clout.
We're
We're
going
doing
to
it
get the
for
clicks.
clout.
40
We need the
minutes,
clicks.
and now they're like, I guess I'll keep listening. I guess I'm invested.
Committed now.
See,
I want to see what's going to be
lured
there
'em in.
next.
Yeah, I reeled him in. I think maybe I was saying, why was Vegas a dud, or why did Vegas suck? I think that's going to be the title. So let's talk about what went right, because in my mind, and I think we're all three, and I know Paul is in lockstep. I think it was a great event, great race. I think everything panned out well. I think ultimately the race was really good. The race was good, offered a lot of action on track. I go back to quote Christian Horner. He said, well, look, you've got high-speed straights, slow corners, and slippery track that nobody's been on. What could possibly be wrong? That's a recipe for great racing, and it was. And the teams lacked any real data here. They've done some sim work, but that's not the same as actually having data from last year. So it was a new track for everybody, a real crapshoot, no pun intended, on the car setup. And it really produced a lot of great racing, and Leclerc's pass on Sergio on the final lap was fantastic. The track worked well. There was a lot of, and I'm not knocking people who are being critical of the track because, honestly, you know, Jeff, you and I talked about on your podcast, when you look at it on a map, it's not the most exciting looking thing, although true racers, and Paul pointed out a few areas that he thought actually looked pretty good, and he was right. But when you look at a map, it didn't scream excitement, but the track actually worked pretty well. And because of the above mentioned reasons, and the local properties know now what's involved in hosting an F1 race. So presumably next year will be a lot better, a lot more efficient. And it wouldn't surprise me if they don't reprofile the track a little bit. Who knows? That happens on street courses all the time. I was worried about the lower temps causing more degradation of the tires, but it actually seemed that the deg was really good, and it wasn't an issue, and the drivers could push relatively harder on these tires without having to manage them as much, and so that led to even faster racing, which is great. And when you think about it on balance, you know, Monaco has history. It has prestige, panache, and a track that is iconic. I know every corner on that track, and I've never been there. Vegas has none of that beyond its own reputation as an entertainment capital for adults in America, an epicenter that never sleeps, an epicenter of entertainment with just about every variety, some not so appropriate variety of entertainment you would want. Time will tell as to if F1 in Vegas can garner that kind of prestige and allure for F1 fans. But overall, I think it went, and I'm not just picking the race too. I think qualifying went really well too. It had an interesting grid, mixed the grid up. From your perspective, Jeff, what did you feel that went right?
You know, I agree. I thought the race was a lot more exciting than I expected it to be, because I know all the pundits ahead of time were saying, oh, it's not that, as you say, it's not that exciting of a track. It's kind of boring looking. There's not a lot of opportunities for overtakes. We'll tell that to the 82 overtakes in this race. Like that was a fun stat when they said that was the second most overtakes of the season. Right. I mean, again, not going to be a lot of overtakes. Well, yeah, 82 of them. That last lap battle was outstanding. I was yelling at my TV while watching it. That was some of the most fun I've had watching a race in a long time. That was great. It felt... The race was good. It was a better race than I expected. It was a lot more exciting. And I think a lot of the stuff that you mentioned that maybe... people may have thought initially would be bad added to that excitement. The low temperatures did add to that excitement because you didn't know what was going to happen. A newly surfaced track. I thought the track, I think I had it in my notes, it looked like one of those concrete cement go-kart tracks.
Right.
Like smooth. Like you're watching it, it's like, wow, that track looks shiny and slippery.
Yeah.
How is this going to go? And so it did actually, I thought that kind of added a little bit to the excitement of the race itself. I thought the opening ceremony was fun to watch. On Wednesday night, it was not nearly as cringy as I was expecting it to be. I thought it was a lot better than anything that Miami did. Watching Miami this year with the driver introductions that looked like the football player introductions or WWE wrestling introductions, I thought, yeah, okay, seeing Max complain afterwards about we stood there for 5 minutes and we looked like clowns. Listen, Max, you know what? This opening ceremony part, this ain't about you, man. This is about Steve Aoki and Tiesto pretending to play music on a laptop and Journey singing "Don't Stop Believing." And
how did Journey get in
coming
there?
out and like all of this iconic entertainment. Yeah. That's what it was about, and that F1 building looked outstanding.
It did look good. It
like
did.
That building, I can't wait to go to Vegas and actually see the building and check it out. My understanding is it's going to be kind of an open to the public thing with some attractions and things. So fingers crossed, maybe. But either way, I thought that went really well. And the weather went well.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't as cold as they were expecting,
Right.
and also no rain, because that was the other thing that was popping up, was everybody was worried it was going to rain. And Vegas does not do rain well. I've been in Vegas when it rains. The ground is very, very dry. It's very, very hard. There's no drainage.
Yeah.
So when it rains, an inch of water turns into that much water
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
quickly. So if it had rained, it would have been a real nightmare. But I mean, overall, I thought it was really good. It was fun to watch. It was entertaining.
Yeah.
And not just because going to Vegas, I know the geography, I know the layout, I know where everything is, I can recognize parts of the street and of the strip, and I know all this stuff. It was just, to the casual F1 watcher, I think that it was a good race, and it was a fun race to watch.
Yeah.
Way more fun than Monaco
Yeah.
to watch, quite frankly.
He brings up a fair point, Grace. I didn't know. Well, knowing it's Vegas, I was expecting the worst on the opening ceremonies and stuff. I will say that it wasn't as bad as kind of what I had created in my mind. I don't know about the plinths, them standing on top of plinths, but then again, after watching the TV coverage, which I am critical of, they had to get the people high enough so the fans could see them. So I get that. And I guess, Grace, the biggest head scratcher is how did Journey get on that bill?
I mean,
Who
what are
knew?
you questioning? I mean,
Well, I didn't even think you could get
Journey.
Neil Schoen and Jonathan Cain in the same room together. They had lawsuits against each other. So
for enough of this, anybody will do anything.
Journey has been traditionally, they've been doing residencies at the Venetian sort of once a year.
Okay.
They'll go in and do some time at the Venetian.
That's why.
So I mean, that was,
They were there
although
anyway.
they were kind of I think they were one of, not a last minute addition, but they were sort of a closer to the event announcement.
Yeah.
They had announced all these other names that were coming out, and then it was like Neil Schoen and Journey, and it was like, oh.
Well,
Okay.
I will tell
Cool.
you,
They're gonna-
Jeff.
They're going to sing "Don't Stop Believing." I'm going to sing along. That's how it's going to go.
I will tell you that Donny Osmond hit it out of the park. I thought he did amazing on the national anthem. He really did. That sound Donny Osmond. Okay, but he sang that. I thought, holy cow, dude, that was fantastic.
And he's been doing a residency in Vegas for
Forever.
the last 2 or 3 years now. He's been. I
heard it was a good show.
I want to say at Harrah's and the Flamingo. Yeah, amazing show,
Yeah.
and really good with his fans and good with his people. So, I mean, he makes sense to be there.
Yeah.
Like everybody that was there at that opening ceremony, they made sense to me.
Yeah.
And I think to people that are Vegas people, I mean, again, Steve Aoki, Tiesto, the DJ guys, they've got huge club residencies there. All the other artists that are there are doing residencies of some sort in Las Vegas. So, I mean, it made sense. And it could have been a lot cringier. And I think you and I, Todd, are in the same mindset of, I'm picturing feathered showgirls and Elvis
Exactly.
impersonators. And the only Elvis presence were Max and Sergio's race suits.
That's right.
From what I could see, they were the only ones. That was
right.
kind of it.
Of course, you did have fellow Canadian Jacques Villeneuve get married there.
Yes, yeah, I saw that afterwards at the lights out and away we wed wedding chapel or whatever they called it.
Something.
You didn't see that coming. might be a good recommendation.
Yeah, I mean, I had a lot of. I'm not gunning for a job with Formula One or Liberty Media. I mean, if they're listening or watching and they're hiring, I'm available. There were a few things. I mean, I would love to see. I think they need more general admission areas. Mm-hmm. That was a big thing, based on the number of people that you saw who were trying to catch a view of the track from various spots. One of my favorite TikTok videos I saw was of a guy who just rode one of the escalators, because they've got all those escalators on the pedestrian bridges. He'd ride it down, and then he'd get on and he'd ride it back up, and he'd ride it down and he'd ride it back up. And that was all he did for almost the entire race. And he had a great view. Yeah. Between that and the people that were tearing the screens down and pulling the film off of the pedestrian bridges, all of that side, I think they need more general admission areas. And the other thing that I would say is make all those general admission areas accessible with a general admission pass. This was one of the most bizarre things, and I think, Todd, you and I talked about this very early, was how anybody that purchased a pass, they were limited to their area. So if you bought a Bellagio Grandstand pass, that was the only area that you could go into. Or if you bought the Sphere GA pass. And I get it, because when it's a street track like that, the entire strip is a general admission area, really. But I think that they could drop the prices if they lowered the prices of those general admission areas. Yeah, still sell those crazy $25,000 packages or whatever with the booze and the food and the blah, blah, blah. But if you sold $350 weekend general admission passes where you could go to specific, keep it still in specific areas, but make it specific areas. And there was a lot, it seemed like there was a lot of open space in the areas around the track. And I understand that obviously you can't have anybody on those pedestrian bridges. That's a safety issue and a safety hazard. That's fine. But in looking at the track and seeing along those, the side of Las Vegas Boulevard that wasn't in use, I understand you've got to have areas for equipment and emergency access and things like that. But there still seemed like there was a lot of dead space in there that they could have very easily utilized as a GA area. So that would be one of the big things. I thought the idea of a fan zone, not specific to the teams, because I know some of the teams were doing those, but they were also accessible only to the people that bought into those, were sponsors or whatever. But like, I know the NFL for Super Bowl and for various events, they do the fan zone, the big fan zone kind of deal, set up a large free fan zone where you do it at the convention center, Las Vegas Convention Center, Mandalay Bay Event Center, something like that. Give people a chance to get up close to the event, set up simulators, bring in cars, bring in drivers, just do something to sort of help build the interest in the sport, make it a little more accessible. Because if you get that guy or that family that maybe goes to the fan zone, meets a driver or a commentator and has a chance to get up close to an F1 car or a show car and touch it and sit in it and play with it and whatever, you know what, maybe next year they buy tickets. And you're building that fan base and getting them more accessible. That was some of the big things that I had. The other thing I think that they really need to work on is better transportation planning. Vegas, getting around Las Vegas is terrible at the best of times. If you've ever been in Las Vegas on a Friday night or a Saturday night during a peak season, it's awful. Like, it is absolutely terrible to get around. So then throw in 100,000 people that are there for a race and close half of the roads. That monorail that they were encouraging everybody to use, the staffers to use, and people, that thing is not designed as a mass transit. It's obsolete and should not even be operating as it is. So never mind trying to tell everybody, hey, that's your way to get around Las Vegas during Grand Prix. No. So they got to sort out some transportation issues. I mean, the other thing that I guess the other big thing was the start times. I don't think doing a night race worked out the way they expected it to, particularly with the timing. I think obviously that affected the audience in the U.S. That didn't make any sense to me. I get that they're catering it for the European audiences, but even the European audiences were complaining they had to wake up so early can't please everyone apparently. But I think what I noticed was the look on TV, and maybe you guys have noticed it as well. It didn't seem as bright or as brilliant as even Singapore or any of the other night races. And I don't know if it was a case of driver glare or TV lighting or what, but it looked like they had the hotels turned off. Like all the signs seemed dim, and the fencing was so high, and putting those screens up on the fencing to block views, it looked like they were racing through a prison yard.
Yep.
And I just thought, like, if you're not going to have the lights of Las Vegas, why do it at night?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Do it at dusk. Start it a few hours earlier and let it, like those, I think Saudi Arabia starts kind of dusk and gets darker as the race goes, and it looks really dramatic and cool. Do that. Yep. Like, it just, I don't know.
Yeah, that's what
Liberty Media F1, if you're listening, I got it.
That's what I advocated. Abu Dhabi, same thing. It starts the sun setting, you go in tonight, and you see the lights come on, and you go in tonight, and Paul and I talked about this a little bit. Grace was do you remember, Grace, when Abu Dhabi first came out, and all of the cameras were set far back, and they would all have to zoom in. All the shots were zoom shots, and they would all pan in. They would all pan and zoom every single time they had switched to another camera. It was panning and then zooming in. And, you'd get vertigo just watching this broadcast. Right. And I was like, would you stop panning and zooming? Please, move the cameras close to the track. Stop it. But the problem I had with Vegas was exactly what Jeff said. Everything was dark. There were no key landmarks that I could visually get a cue on. I had no idea when they passed the Paris. No idea when they went by Bellagio or Caesars. Caesars is well known. No idea when they went by Caesars. And everything was dark. The fences were high. The light stanchions were on the TV cameras. The light stanchions were just high enough to put the actual lights in the center of the track. So as the cars were going down the track, I couldn't see the cars. I could only see it from the helicopter, which was above the light stanchions, looking down on the track. But from the perspective of the TV cameras, you couldn't see them. So my only big kind of criticism of the whole event, everything else I think went great, and I really enjoyed the weekend. But my criticism is really start times and the TV camera placement. That when they, after the race, Grace, they all got in the car and they drove over by the Bellagio. It was so dark over there, and the camera looked like it was still zoomed in from the main podium across town. It was so distant, and it was really dark, and it was it was a mess. So hopefully they figured the TV camera things out. But did you notice that, Grace?
I just wanted to say that, first of all, I don't want to go a whole podcast without mentioning MotoGP, but you mentioned how they made Max and Charles and Checo all ride in the car together, which they do in MotoGP all the time, and I love it. And I'm glad, again, Stefano Domenicali, cool. You for sure listen to this podcast, because I have been begging for that for the longest time, because Max Verstappen just wants to talk after every race. You can see that the other drivers are like, and I was like, and my husband Flip pointed out, like, he's like, oh yeah, he's like Espargo in, Alicia Espargo, who's also very chatty in MotoGP, and I'm like, oh, now it makes sense, because they all kind of tune out Alicia too. They're just like, shut up, man, we just ran this race. Can I have 5 minutes of peace and quiet before I have to go be in front of the public again? And Alicia never stopped. So it was like, once I loved it that there's Max in the middle on the bump seat that, like, I used to have to ride in as the youngest of three, right? Yeah. Way too close to the camera, which is where they always like make Pecco sit, right? So it was just great. I'm glad that Formula One is finally latched on to one of the great after race features that I enjoy of MotoGP, is let's put these three guys who may or may not like each other or want to talk about anything together. And especially if there's some guy that never stops talking and the other two are like, Leclerc's just like, this guy's my friend, but I know this is enough. And Checo's just like, I don't want this. I don't want this. Nobody wants this. So right on that. But I think so. I get that it was kind of like a cow shoot, right? When they would do it from the cars shot, right? Like it felt this way, and like, you'd have I know people on the podcast, right? But you'd have this, or people that aren't watching it, right? Just listening to it, but you'd have this, the high fence, it felt like a cow shoot. Then you have some lights twinkling up here, and you're like, oh, wait, what is that, right? And then you'd see the spear, and that would be, you'd be back around again. So
didn't it remind you
that is a really good point.
Of the Jersey Barrier race at Valencia, just done at night? Remember the Jersey Barrier race at Valencia?
Of course, where I think the highlight of that
Jersey barriers
is if the bridge would have actually opened. Right?
Yeah,
like, I think that's the only way Valencia would have been ever any good was, with a little Dukes of Hazzard over that bridge occasionally when it opens, right? Similar to when I've had friends look at the race map for Suzuka and they go, whoa, does the track go in, like, is it a figure eight into itself? I'm like, no, it's a bridge. They're always so disappointed because they're like, this is the one track that looks like, oh, I'd watch that. They're gonna have to cross. No, they don't cross. Sorry.
Yeah.
It's a flat picture.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think that's a good point that I hope they've there's other, like Singapore, I think would be the best place for them to look towards, because I think it probably is different when it's a street course at night versus, a purpose-built course, right? I've been to Abu Dhabi. You have a lot more space, so you don't have to have those kind of high fences because you aren't like right up on it like you are in a street course. So,
but even
you don't
Baku,
have to have the high fences.
Even Baku has more visual cue points than this did. I guess that was my struggle, Jeff, is that you really wanted to show Vegas as the backdrop. And once you got into the race, the cameras were far away from the track. They were zoomed in. They were panning and zooming. The lighting, although on the track, the on-track lighting was bright and nice, but everything else was so dark, and you couldn't get any visual cues or lines of sight to any of the hallmark icons of Vegas, and it kind of negated the whole thing.
My only point of reference for it, much like the race teams, I've never driven. Well, actually, I guess I had driven on the streets of Vegas more than some of those drivers actually have. But I, being giant nerd, F123 on my PlayStation. The Vegas track is on there. I did a lot of driving. I even did a little live stream the night when they delayed FP2. I jumped on. I went, well, Vegas is a disaster. You know what? I'll do some free practice driving for Vegas. You can watch me do it. Why not? I'm much worse at it than these guys are, but I promise I won't hit any manholes. The frame of reference in playing that game, as I was driving on the game, I'm like, even though they didn't name any of the hotels, they clearly didn't get full licensing rights, but all the architecture is there, just not the names. As you're driving by, you could see there's the Sands Convention Center. There's the Wynn. Oh, we're making the turn. That's the CVS at Treasure Island. Okay, that's the Venetian on this side. On this side, here's the, you're going past the Mirage now. Oh, now you're at the and I could pick out all the things as I was doing it in the game. Watching the actual race, you couldn't pick out anything. As you say, it was, Grace, you nailed it. It looked like the cow chute. Like it was, you're driving in a tunnel. The roads were gray. The walls were gray. The fences were gray. And they went high and you couldn't see, and everything was not lit. So again, I don't know if that was a safety thing for the drivers and that they were concerned about glare from the lights, or because of the way they had to light it for TV, if they couldn't have the lights of the signs and the marquees on. But I mean, that's when people picture Vegas, they picture marquees and signage and lights, and that was kind of the whole point of hosting it as a night event, wasn't it? I mean, they wanted to have it at night so they could showcase the Vegas lights, and
they turned them all off.
The only time you got, they turned them all off, and the only time you really got anything was the Sphere. The Sphere was the big publicity winner for this weekend by all stretch. Or when they did the full aerial shots, you could then kind of get an idea of where things were. But even then, like you say, Todd, like you couldn't tell when they were whipping past the Paris or past Caesars or when they were coming up to the turns. Like you couldn't tell anything. And it really kind of was mildly disappointing to watch as a Vegas file and looking at it and going, Couldn't tell where they were. They could have been anywhere.
Yeah.
You know, I think it would be interesting. You know, there's some way they figure out, like, if you're a sponsor on a car, how many eyeballs saw your sponsorship, like if you're on Williams versus Aston versus Ferrari, right? I wonder, that CVS is so prominent right there, like at Treasure Island. Like, I wonder how many eyeballs must have hit that CVS that have never hit that before, because you'd always find that CVS for sure.
That's so true.
Yeah.
Really sticks out. It's just like, oh, casino. CVS, casino. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Listen, I'll tell you, when they opened the first Walgreens on the Vegas Strip at the Venetian, that was news. It got its own TripAdvisor reviews for a long time when it was the first Walgreens right at the Venetian. And I'm not going to lie, it was very convenient. I spent a lot of time there. Now there's Walgreens all over the place, there's CVS everywhere. It's not all that exciting anymore.
That's funny.
Now it's like every other city where there's a CVS on one corner and catty corner is the Walgreens. It's like, whoa.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah,
it's so true. Well, excellent. I appreciate it, Jeff, for you coming on, and Grace. I think I'll hold my headlines until next week, because there's not a lot to talk about in F1 anyway. And we'll just keep this F1
We'll
centric.
keep it for week 2. It'll be good.
Yeah, week 2 of how many, Grace?
14.
14 weeks. You got 14 weeks of this. And I know we brag about it all the time, that when all the other podcasts and everybody rolls up their sidewalks and they're done creating content for the off season, we keep going. We plow through every week, and we brag about it all the time. But I'm sure the people are saying, "Yeah, but there's nothing to talk about. You might as well stop, for crying out loud."
That's never stopped us.
That's never
We've been doing
stopped
this
us.
for 70 years. It's never stopped us from talking about things.
Yeah, this is this going on our 17th or 18th year? It's something like that.
It's been a
Been
long
doing
time.
a long time, folks. Long
But before
time.
you close out,
Yes.
I also feel like not only should a podcast go by that I don't talk about MotoGP, but Jeff, we have to talk about. So, what's your favorite place to eat at in Vegas?
Oh my God, I'm a fat kid. I love to eat everywhere. It's just
I know you only get one though. Like, somebody's just there Thursday night. They're gonna watch P1. They're gonna go to dinner. They can get in anywhere.
Man. Put me on the spot here. Okay, so I'm a steak guy.
Okay.
Love a steak. I will say steakhouse. I'm going to say just off the strip. I'm going to say Golden Steer.
I've never been there.
This is a heritage steakhouse. It's the oldest continuously running steakhouse in Las Vegas. They've been there, I think, close to 60 years. Some of the original staff, like people that have been there for 35 years there, they are a legit former mob hangout. They used to have guys like Tony Spilatro and Frank Rosenthal and Frank Culotta come in there and hang out. They have booths that are celebrity booths. You can go in there and eat in Frank Sinatra's booth. When my wife and I went in there, we ate Joe DiMaggio's booth. The food is outstanding. The service is incredible. It's not a cheap meal, but worth every single penny. So if you're going for steak, I would say Golden Steer. That's my
I like
place.
it. That's good. Now I have a place to go when we go next time on the off season.
There you
I
go.
like it. Golden Steer.
Definitely.
I think I got to go to CES this year, so I may have to check that one out.
There you go.
For some reason, I feel like I've been there though. Yeah, I'll figure that out. But anyway, all right. So, well, that does it for this podcast. What we think about the Las Vegas. I hope you enjoyed that, Jeff. It's awesome to have you on. Thanks for doing this, and really appreciate you having me on your show. And it's been really fun getting to know you and your podcast, and I've really thoroughly enjoyed the friendship. So thanks for taking the time out.
Yeah, and I
come
hope
on.
people check out Jeff. I was, in my Kimi Räikkönen research, your podcast really does cover everything. I mean, I think as I was saying, Vegas is whatever you want it to be, whatever you're interested in. You guys really. I was listening to your winter preview, winter review.
Yep.
Yeah, it was great. Like, I mean, if you. So anyway, like you're saying, like history, there is the hey, where do I stay? What do I eat? How do I gamble? But there's also the what is this thing? What is this off the strip? So it was great. I was checking it out. So give it a listen, folks, and whatever you want from Jeff Does Vegas, it's pretty much in there somewhere. So
Yeah.
I appreciate you guys asking me to come on and have a conversation about Formula One. I mean, two of my favorite things in the world, Formula One and Las Vegas. So
Perfect.
if I have an opportunity to chat with you guys, I absolutely would jump at it. So I appreciate that. And Todd, I appreciate you coming on and chatting on mine as well. And, this is going for another 10 years. So we'll make it an annual.
There you go.
There's 2 shows covered.
Yeah, that's right. We got
A
2
pre-show
shows.
and end show. We're good.
Pre-show and a post-show covered.
We're all set, man. There's 2 of our, numerous shows, 50 shows. That's great. Excellent. All right. Well, that does it for
Jeff.
this podcast. Make sure you stop by at theparcfermé.com. Share your opinion. Just do so with decorum, civility, as always. No personal attacks. And also, let us know what you think was right and wrong about the Las Vegas Grand Prix and what your thoughts are. You can leave the comments in the comment section. If you're watching us on YouTube, click the subscribe, hit the bell icon thingy or whatever happens there. I'm assured by other YouTube creators it's supposed to benefit us. I don't know how, but I trust YouTube to figure that out. But anyway, so if you're watching this, do that. Appreciate it. A huge thank you to our patron supporters. Could not and would not do this podcast if it was not for our patron supporters. Without you folks, I would have to pack it up and we'd be done. So you are the thing that stands between us and oblivion, and I am incredibly grateful. And as always, we will be back next week to do this all over again. Be sure to check out Jeff's podcast, jeffdoesvegas.com, or just look that up on any of your favorite podcast players. And until next week, when we do it all over again, this is Todd, a.k.a. Negative Camera, saying so long.
That's it, man. Game over, man. It's game over.